Um, Assalamualaikum. Um, good morning, everyone. So thank you so much to the Asia Center University of the Philippines for this kind opportunity. What I am about to share is a preliminary study on the making of self-knowledge in Tanah Jawi. Self-knowledgement here is related to self-identification built by new waves of structure of perceiving man and race that shaped oneself sense of belonging to certain race among the Jawians. So Jawians refer here are the people of Tanah Jawi, a geographical name denoted pre-colonial Indonesia and Malaysia. Um, just for easier for you to follow, let me share my screen. It's kind of slow. Okay. All right. So this is the title that we are going um, we are going to see today. The making of self-knowledge in Tanah Jawi, newspapers, scientification, and romanization, 1850s to 1930. Right. What you see here is a map. Found among the letters that sent by Sultan Ibrahim Mansur Shah of Aceh Darussalam Sultanate in Sumatra via his envoy Muhammad Gauss. So these letters basically were intended to reach Istanbul, and it did. And in this map, it shows that the islands that currently now in Indonesia, and also another islands which is written over there, Anatole, which is meant some areas in Malaysia. So this is the letters mention exactly that these are what nouns at that time in 1849 as Tanah Jawi. So I'm referring to this lens in talking about the subject today. So sources of information and knowledge have been centered from educational institution and media. Both were transformed in terms of approach and method since the 19th century. There is no doubt that the two sources have been highly contributed dominantly to the general development in the world. But with the ongoing climax of racial issues nowadays across the world, one may ask on its origination and processes that triggered unrest, heritable views that implicate a relation between humans. So by having a worldly digital access to colonial newspapers from 1850s to 1930s, this study examines the role of newspapers, scientific knowledge, and romanization adoption in the making of native self-knowledge understanding on race. I hope this preliminary research finding would provide additional narrative to the study of knowledge production in Southeast Asia. So literary medium of self-knowledge establishment in Tanah Jawi, previously illuminated by religious moral standards driven through text, imposed on Zawiyah and common folks by sultans and kings, that highlighted a significant priority on attaching certain moral condition nurtured by race difference and intellectual distinction, or race nature of privilege, encompassed through structural measurements method. So it's imprisoned the way to see social states, its demise, changes in society. So scripts before the invention of mass printing production in Malaysia and Indonesia were men written using Arabic script in numerous indigenous and transboundaries language, and dominantly for the purpose of religious literature of facts and fictions, poems, genealogical tracts, property records, law, medicine, magic, and other things, which mostly produced in the sense of royal and religious educational attribution. Common folk were given a Wider access to entertainment-based texts such as hikayat, serat, babat, and syair, performed in special occasion intended as illumination of moral conduct toward the nature, environment, towards family, communities, and God, without certain standard of conduct privilege based on race. Well, illumination on superior races and obsession on differences of class and intellectuality between common people was not dominant, although societies in Java, both the Hindus and the Muslim, who prioritize on class, not race privilege, will exist. And we know Enlightenment period was the founding father of theory on race. The invention of race as a theory was shared by biased traveler accounts and teleological theories driven through colonial settlers' observation in America, India, and in Africa. Immanuel Kant's works surrounding theory of human race that written between 1780 to 1790 were extremely problematic. Kant's focus on physical features such as skin color, facial traits, and hair structure, which assessed as a measurement of the lack of character and intellectuality, such as his comment that blacks are lazy and that Native Americans have a half extinguished vital energy. He also asserts that Native Americans are the lowest of the four races, um, as they are inert, impassive, and incapable of being educated at all. He places the Negroes above them as they are capable of being trained to be slaves, but are incapable of any other forms of education. He also, in fact, said that the Hindus are superior to the Negroes because they can be educated, but they can only be educated in the art, not in the science and other endeavors that require abstract concept. The race of whites contain all incentive and talents, he said. So basically, he implied that only the white could rule the world. So maybe that's why we understand how colonialism was happen. His ideas was not shared by him alone, but widespread in Europe as the trend of Enlightenment ideas travels to colonial lands in Africa, India, and Southeast Asia through its colonizers. For the regions where word of race is empty, of construction such as that in Tanah Jawi, filling this word with such theory imported by traveler and colonial administration will surely contribute to a time span of intellectual invasion expanded through events, causes, and effects, heritable to many generations, or as what Said Hussein Al-Atas put it, the captive minds. Ferdinand Bradel said that doubtless philosophers would tell us that to treat the word thus is to empty it of a great part of its meaning. So an event can, if necessary, take a whole range of meaning and associations. It can occasionally bear witness to very profound movements, and by making play factiously or not with those cause and effects, it can appropriate a time far greater than its own time span. Infinitely extensible, it becomes wedded, either freely or not, to a whole chain of events of underlying realities, which are then, it seems, impossible to separate. On the word of race, field in theory, followed other significant words entailed to it, such as foreign or foreigner, migration, which resulted in ideas of anti-migration, and slavery, and many more, etc., that needs to be urgently reconstructed. So knowledge on race and self-identity in Tanah Jawi was construction of 19th century modern achievement that is through imperialism and colonialism, particularly heightened during the massive printing and distribution of colonial newspapers written in Roman scripts that gradually employed a new field in words and language and system of measure, shaping views based on the thermometer of truth called scientific methods. As mentioned before, European travelers' accounts on society of Tanah Jawi served the ground of persuasion that legitimate repetition of biased views on moral and intellectual measure, dubbed as scientific and coherent information that colonial newspapers released over and over again. These scientific prejudices was embraced and gradually shaping fears toward the difference. This created a dominant culture in understanding certain race, which now understood as a knowledge hierarchy. The obsession of being different in the sense of hierarchy of race in Tanah Jawi expands deeper in early 20th century, resulted from knowledge gained from imperialist capitalist views in newspapers, building up chains of transfer of information to the world. The earliest colonial newspaper in the street settlements is dated from 1820s, which covered news from all over the globe, mostly on colonized regions in Southeast Asia and the ports, including news on shipping arrival and departure, social and political events, war, dispute, and entertainment. The nature of information of the newspaper was naming names and race, frequently in the sense of scientific defamation, which is a new type of knowledge that shared widely to public. As the result, of the prolific influence of newspaper and contacts with European Victorians and colonial administration, a new taste of knowledge contesting social phenomenon through analytical structure, um, through analytical structure approach emerged in 1850s through the work of the Hikayat Abdullah in 1852, followed later by Tufat al-Nafis in 1868, and increasingly through colonial and vernacular newspapers from the end of 19th century to the first half of 20th century. The knowledge of foreign migration and privilege based on race and class were frequently implied explicitly or implicitly that this type of knowledge created certain labeling to the generations. So clarification from the primary sources were extremely lacking due to the condition that was prone to war and conflict, as well as the fact that the colonial masters tended to see conforming the findings to the primary actors was irrelevant due to the prejudices over the intellectual measures. The matter was worse when many locally driven newspapers were short-lived. Irrelevant Darwinism theory in 1880s on the origin of species contributed to the prolonged racism knowledge when idea of people from Asia and Africa were still evolved, which gathered tremendous support and resulted in intensifying imperialistic civilizing mission in Tanah Jawi. The methods of looking into man through the structural rationality resulted from facts and evidences adopted widely in courts, legal system, and schools, where racial profiling and elite favoritism by race subtly accompanied the development of social beings, and the fact that indigenous pre-colonial knowledge were treated as scientific and at worst contested to be included as reliable knowledge to be studied has further contributed to the nature of hierarchy of race, that the countries or communities that belong to highly preserved and scientifically woven past were dubbed as the most civilized, and descent that segregation between race was simultaneous. So at least in 1920, Jawi script was replaced with Roman script, which provided the gate to the mass systemic colonial knowledge production on self-identity. Unintermittently, this system of producing knowledge was institutionalized, and the force of imposing Roman scripts began instructively and massively adopted, not only in schools, but also government administration, that further allowed complementation and contestation of self-knowledge in a new way, in a sense of I am not you and you are not them. So finally, although colonialism ended and independence gained, colonial knowledge production sustained, which displayed through institutionalized racism or institutionalized treatment deployed through government policies, law, education, and the way the media treated certain race and events. So I think this is all from me. Thank you so much for listening.